Welcome to You Sip, I Sip, a weekly podcast with Northern Lights Winery founder Doug Bell, exploring the experiences from leaders in business, social media, and family. Now here's this week's exceptional guest.
Welcome to You Sip, I Sip, here with Clint James, aka Clinton Herman, a broadcaster from 101.3 The River and morning show host. Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming by. It's funny. We've been friends for years. Matter of fact, you lived with me years ago. And who would have believed some of the photos that you had back then? Luckily, you aren't sharing all of those photos, but I hear that you did put some nice personalized touches on some of the stuff you sent my team this week.
Yeah, Seth, he's your graphic guy, and he asked for some photos for some, I don't know, the social media stuff you'll do later on, and I included a photo of you and your lovely wife, Jen. Was it my birthday?
Yeah.
My birthday, I had a dress as your spouse party, and Doug really went for it.
It was a lot of fun. I don't mind dressing up.
Did you ruin her leggings?
Well, the thing is that they were probably her oldest ones anyways. So you gotta use what you have. And I've got nice legs. So
they were nice gams. They're good.
Anyways, I hope no one else sees that photo. If they do, of course, they got some context now. But for context of our conversation today, you are a recognizable social figure. One of the interesting things about being in broadcasting, in particular, as a morning show host for one of the top radio stations in the city, you are kind of a bit of a local celebrity, right? And probably doesn't feel like it all the time. Although when you go out and you see like kids and you go to classrooms and people, hear you on the radio, they get really excited because you're a part of people's lives every day. Right, like when they're coming to work or they're in the office, like you're actually interacting with them, even though you don't recognize that. It seems like an incredibly interesting job, and I'm really interested to hear your perspective on it. But before we get too far in, I wanted to hear about where you grew up and where you came from.
I was growing in Vancouver. The year is 1990. I am birthed in East Van. Ice Ice Baby is the number one song on the radio. I know all the words to that. I do it on karaoke all the time. Yeah, I grew up in a kind of I don't want to say a split family. Eventually it was, but I have two half sisters, a half brother, and then later I'd go on to have another step brother. The whole family thing, we need a whole other podcast just for that because it is quite the mix. But grew up, went to Kitsilano Secondary in Kitsilano, part of Vancouver, same high school as Ryan Reynolds. So my locker was, you remember like high schools where they'd have like the grad photos of like the headshots of previous graduating classes, and yeah, Ryan Reynolds picture. So I'd look like, oh cool. But I was a big drama kid in high school, part of the improv team, do the high school plays. Wasn't really the musical kid, can't sing, don't want me to. And
I've heard you sing, it's not bad.
It's pretty bad. I'd graduate, and my dad, he's like, well, my dad's in film, actually. He makes TV commercials. Same with my sister. My whole family kind of is involved in like the show business, where my mom, or my other half sister, April, she does makeup. Another one, Maya, she would do production stuff. And so I guess growing up, I realized, I'm like, oh, it's kind of feasible. You can do this. I got to experience the behind the scenes of, television commercials, and my dad's perspective was, because I was, acting, like, I don't want you to be an actor, because like I see the starving artists all the time. He's like, you want a job, so it's awesome, you're creative, so find a creative path. And while I was in high school, I was working at White Spot and being a cook. I love to cook, and so I'm like, okay, do I want to become a cook? Like, that's creative, that's fun. Or do I want to, I don't know, pursue a creative path, something to do with acting? Took a gap year, traveled to Europe for like 3 months, and I worked at a restaurant in Vancouver, a couple of them. And like, there's some cooking, you're cooking someone else's recipe most of the time, and then it's a lot of custodial work. This isn't that fun. So I applied to BCIT to go into the broadcast journalism program to become like a news anchor, be on TV, and did not pass the writing test. My English grades and writing was not up to snuff, but they said, hey, radio, go try it, have at her. And I applied, I got on the waiting list, and got the letter in the mail saying, "Hey, you've been accepted. Buck up, give us the money." And 2-year program at BCIT, and then I jumped in both feet. I applied to a bunch of jobs all the way to like Sarnia, Ontario to Prince George, and I got a call one day saying, "Hey, do you want a job? Can you move here in 8 days?"
Whoa. Like, how old were you at this point?
I would be, yeah, it was the summer after the 2011 Stanley Cup run.
Hmm.
So I remember like the city's on fire and I'm applying to jobs.
That must be pretty crazy. And one of the things, like for those who aren't in broadcasting, they don't kind of understand the way that this works. But generally, people like yourself go through the program at BCIT. Not everyone. Some people actually get in directly, and then they start in like a small market, and then they move to a medium market, and then they move to a large market. With the ultimate goal being probably like morning show host is like the pinnacle of success in any station. Obviously not always, but can be. And then on top of that, it's people who want to get to like the big markets, because in broadcasting, especially when you're starting out, there's not a ton of money in it, right? It looks like you become famous, maybe you get some like perks or some free tickets to concerts and stuff like that, but it's not like it's a ton of money, especially when you start out. So, coming out as a kid, money wasn't a really big deal, but opportunity was a deal. And you didn't just get a first job, you got a first job in a medium-sized market, which is typically very difficult to do.
That's right. Could have been worse. Could have had to go to Chetwynd. Like Prince George, it is a rated market, so there's more revenue opportunities, which means there's more salary opportunities for any given person. So I got the job in 2011 working for Vista Radio here, doing weekend swing. So I would on Saturdays were my Mondays. So I worked 3 radio stations on Saturdays. I would do the country station. Sorry, no, I would do the rock station in the morning, and then I would pre-record a show out in Vanderhoof on a country station, and then in the afternoon during the 5-minute newscast, I'd have to run down the hall, plug my headphones, and then do a country show for like another 3-4 hours.
Crazy. And you came up with like a bit of a personality, right? And maybe does a personality follow the station a little bit, right? Like obviously country stations are going to have a country personality, and is that the type of thing you were thinking about when you got into the business?
Um, are you trying to refer to this Clint James name you dropped at the beginning of the pod?
Well, Clint James is interesting because that's how I knew you forever, and I just heard about this guy Clint James, and it's a friend of ours, Jennifer Lee. Like often their alter egos are not even their real names, and it's kind of funny because it kind of becomes their personality that everybody knows them for before they've even met them.
I was ashamed maybe of using my last name, Herman. So I just went by my middle name because it sounded more slick, I guess. And on a country radio station, Clint James sounded cool. But developing a personality for a show, young in my career, early on, I was just still getting used to everything else of like having an actual career job. It's like, what? I get to leave work at the end of the day and I just have to figure out what to make for dinner for the rest of my life. That's what that being an adult is.
Tell us about the early years getting into Prince George, because it was a little bit different as well. And you took on some other jobs. I believe you were maybe even doing like tunes and trivia and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right. One of the other fellows at the radio station, part-time, he would host, no, it was Naughty Bingo. Dirty Bingo. It was up at the Thirsty Moose at UNBC, and the manager, that's when I met her, and she would later go on to become my wife. That was cool. It was just neat to have like another source of income where you go meet people and have a couple drinks paid for and give away vloggers.
When you're coming from the big city, moving to a smaller center, although being a mid-sized market in Prince George, um, what was that like the initial period like? Like it must be fairly stressful trying to meet people, trying to integrate with the community. There was probably expectations of your employer as well, in terms of like how you would become known.
I just kind of dove right in, right? Like I'm always been kind of easygoing, so I just like, well, I'm doing this. I'm moving to Prince George, so and I don't know a soul in Prince George, so I just moved into a house with like four other people. It was like a bunch of UNBC students, so I did that and made friends with people at work, and uh, like I like the outdoors to begin with. So I think it was a little bit of a culture shock from living downtown Yaletown to, why does this, what's that smell? Like, what's going on? You have to drive everywhere. No one walks. Like, transit. What?
I mean, you met your wife as well, but those early years you were probably thinking about like how your career was going to develop as well.
I just remember it was a bunch of young people, similar age group to myself, and it was kind of a revolving door at that radio station of people like, okay, I'm just here to like build up the resume, and I'm gonna take off. Either they're from the East Coast, they wanted to, end up in Toronto. That was the big goal, and for myself, it was kind of the same, where I'm like, all right, this is cool. My whole time, my dad was saying it's good to have staying power on your resume. So, and a future employer might look and you're like, why are you just bouncing around? Like, do I want to hire this person that's, just going to be here for 6 months? So I made a commitment to stick around for 2 years and, soak up a bunch of information. And I think that's had some success for me. So after 2 years, I had applied to a bunch of other places and ended up getting a job back at home in Vancouver, which is really cool.
Right on. Where was that, and how did that come about? Because at the time you were now dating your now wife, and she had to come with you. I assume that probably was an interesting conversation.
Yeah, she was wrapping up school, so I'm like, hey, we're doing this long distance thing, and she's like, yep. So I moved down to Vancouver, found a furnished basement suite, and started working. I had full 5 day a week, working weekends and evenings and all over the place. And we did the long distance. And when she graduated a little later in 2012, sorry, no, it'd be like 2013, 2014 by then. She ended up moving down and we moved in together and yeah, bounced all over the place in Vancouver and to another place in South Van. And from there, I applied to a job in Winnipeg just because I was tired of working weekends. I wanted, a daytime slot. By the time I was 25, it was a goal that I wanted to, have my own show instead of like fill in and working weekends. And yeah, I wanted to have some personal time.
Hmm. That's pretty cool. So, I mean, Winnipeg is another big move. It's a big difference. Tell us a little bit about Winnipeg and like how did you get received there? Because this was your kind of, I mean, you had a big opportunity in Vancouver, but Winnipeg was probably the one you really started to become like a more of a main focus of the station. How does that change? Like, I'm really curious. Like when the station like identifies you as like you're a key contributor, and I'm sure everybody is, but to some degree there are people that they really focus in on and they try and highlight and they put on the billboards and they create a more of an aura or personality around, which mimics the station in a lot of ways. How does that work? And yeah.
Well, you're right. Earlier on, you mentioned how it's all about the morning show. You want to market the morning show as much as possible. If someone listens to the morning show, it's most likely they're going to return to your radio station several times throughout the day. They're going to start with you. They're they're your P1s. They're most, your most valuable listeners. But in Winnipeg, I took the opportunity to move there, and my name wasn't necessarily in lights because it was to do afternoons. Winnipeg is a cool place. It's the biggest small town you'll ever go to. So they have an NHL team, and they love CFL football there. Couldn't say the same when you're in Vancouver, where watching BC Lions football isn't like the coolest thing to do necessarily. It's great. People, they really embraced winter, which I thought was cool. So like you're skating on frozen rivers and eating in ice huts on the river in February, and then during the summer, everyone goes to their cottage, right? So it is a different lifestyle. People were totally cool with just being in Manitoba. I met tons of people who never left the country before because they're like, why? I get to go to the Jets during the winter and I have a cottage and I get to go fishing. And it's great. So Manitoba is a really great spot. And I think working there as a BC boy, I genuinely craved mountains.
Mm.
Like there was just something that's a different vibe that I was craving. So I was only in Winnipeg for 18 months after I got downsized by the big employer. That's the thing about radio. You could be doing a great job, and then the bean counters at head office somewhere could be like, you know what, we're gonna trim positions back and get rid of this, or we're gonna flip formats. This isn't working.
Yeah. And so, I mean, those decisions get made all the time, and that's probably like a pretty, I mean, that's pretty tough, obviously, on you or on the team there, because there constantly is that rotation within radio. And I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me as a listener. I mean, I've heard, a lot of different broadcasters over the years, and you get one that you like really like, and then either they move on or whatever happens. But I mean, it's also a really difficult industry, right? Because you are they say like when you are doing something, if it's free, you aren't like you're not the person they're selling to, you are the product, right? And so essentially you're creating a platform where the product is the listeners, and the more listeners there are, the more advertisers will be willing to spend money on that radio station, and then that there in turn pays your wages. But for a lot of these groups or a lot of these radio stations, what you find is that there's waves of things that come in and out, right? There's this economic activity. I mean, during COVID, like it was absolutely terrible for the broadcasting networks, right? Because people weren't advertising
We
for a
promote
significant period
events,
of
right?
time.
If there's no events, no
Yeah.
concerts.
So you've done a lot of things, and when you are become the face of a station, even if you're new to the station, you also have to like export yourself, and you have to go out into the community and shake hands and stuff. What's that like, and what are the things that you do to become more notable on the station?
It's always encouraged community activity. There is a get out into the community, and as someone new in radio, you're like, what does that mean? You know, I think over the years I've found it's just doing stuff that everyone else is doing. Go to that hockey game, go to the football game, and then talking about your experience, bumping into people. Because if it's a smaller market, like we have, television commercials. I'm wearing the same shirt on a billboard, probably not too far away from where we're recording this, right? So there is some recognition, and people will see you. If you bump into people, it's like politicians going out and shaking hands and kissing babies. If they see you, it's another more likely they might vote for you or check you out, right? Someone meets Doug from the winery. They've never tried your wine before, but then they see your wine at the liquor store. They're gonna be like, oh yeah, maybe I'll give it a shot, right?
Mhm.
So that's why it's important we get out into the community. I think cool things that we get to do is meet artists.
What's some of the favorite artists you've ever met?
I thought it was pretty cool once Tom Green was doing a comedy tour, and I invited him to the radio station. This was down in Vancouver, and I got him to talk about Big Show ahead of time, and I got him to rap "Check the OR" on the show. I'm like, "Do you still know the lyrics?" He's like, "Of course I do." And improve it, and thought that was really cool. You grow up with some of these famous people or bands, and you finally meet them. We had Mumford and Sons come into the station, and we're doing a little intimate kind of lounge show. This was hilarious. And so they're in the green room, and I'm say hello like before we hop out there, and I turn my back, and Marcus Mumford, he's taking his shoes off, and I just smell like, what is that? And he just like took a huge hoot of a vaporizer. A very earthy hoot. I'm like, all right, this is what we're doing, I guess.
Those kind of like, then you become like the Joe Rogan, I guess, in that situation. But how do you approach content in general? Because it seems really natural when you're on the radio in the mornings, and you're talking about a lot of different things. You're coming up with different ideas, like the impossible question, or you have to like talk about different things that are happening in the community. But I mean, that's kind of a lot of stress, because it's like every single day you need to make it as entertaining as humanly possible for your listeners.
I try and talk about whatever's happening locally. If there's like the Great Quake of 2022 here in Prince George not too long ago, just big things that are happening locally in the world, things that people really care about, right? We have a target audience of 25 to 54-year-old females, and that seems very broad. So I kind of narrow it down. Like, okay, we have a mutual friend named Rebecca. I'm like, what does Rebecca care about today? She's a mom, 2 kids in high school. Like, what really gets her going? What she actually engage with and listen to? You know, so that's what I run it through, and just a lot of real stuff. I try not to bring up too much fluff necessarily about the Kardashians.
Hmm. I mean, I love the Kardashians. I'm sure everyone else does too, but I would rather hear about, Owen at Nancy O's because that's more local, right? That's more connected to where I live. But it also can be very humorous too, right? You have an interesting line because on your existing station, uh, it is very family friendly, but you've also been on like rock stations where you can be a little more edgy. And do you try and like tailor the content a little bit more? And like, how do you do that? Like, how do you get to know your audience better so that you know what they want?
Just going to meet them, creeping people on Facebook's very helpful. Oh, throwing stuff up on social media. What did people actually engage with? Or does this get a bunch of likes? Does it not? Are people, when we talk about a particular topic on air, do people call in or text about it? What's the care level? So it all goes back through the Rebecca filter.
One of the things that like interests me the most about audio in particular is that you are telling a story, right? Like you have to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has to make sense. You have to create anticipation, almost like a story where there's like a beginning, a middle, a climax, right, and then an end. And that's what makes good listening, right? And that's what makes your shows always good, is because you can paint the picture in my mind and I can see it right as you're moving through like the story. Is that like, how intentional is that, and is that like part of the training, or is that just something that you've picked up over the years?
I think being a good storyteller is important, no matter really. Storytelling is important in pretty much every career path, essentially, especially in media. Doesn't matter if it's visual, a written word, or us talking through microphones. Um, that's what through experience and time that makes you a better storyteller and more compelling, and you get the better and better job. So like the biggest jobs in media are usually people who are great storytellers. Steven Spielberg, incredible storyteller, actors, everyone great storytelling. It all comes down to that, really.
And it changes as well when you have a co-host versus when you're on your own. You're literally, if you're on your own, you're just talking at a mic. I mean, you're not talking to a mic, but you got to like picture someone behind there.
Yeah. Picture Rebecca.
You're talking to Rebecca.
All the time. Rebecca, all the time.
Does your wife know this?
Sometimes. Sometimes Carmen.
Yeah.
Hi, sweetie.
Right. But if you were talking to, let's say that you're not just talking to Rebecca now, you're actually talking to a co-host. Does that change the outcome? Is Rebecca still in the room, or your wife Carmen?
Well, my co-host Vilma, it's I'm just talking to her as well, right? And we've gotten to know each other pretty well, and I know what makes her tick, and we have these kind of pre-established characters, right? Mm-hmm. So things that their character is interested in, because it's still a show business, so you still have to, it isn't just get upset, you got to get mad. You're not just happy, you're super excited about something. So you have to kind of go to the extremes and push each other's buttons. And the cool thing is you don't necessarily always know how this person is going to react, because this person you might know. So I know that we have a particular piece of content coming up, and is it going to be shocking to them? I won't tell Vilma ahead of time, and I'll just spring it on her live on the show, and you get the genuine reaction. And I think that resonates with people as being genuine and being authentic.
Yeah, for sure. I like the idea though as well, being it's like maximizing the emotional impact, right? So if something was like a little bit upsetting to you, now it's really upsetting. But if something was like really exciting, then it's really exciting as well. And you try and integrate your family in as well. I know you talk a lot about your daughter on air. Sometimes you talk about my son on air, but how does like that work? And like, do you ever feel like there's a line or that you don't want to cross, or how do you like come up with what is acceptable for you and you're comfortable with?
Well, I know a lot of parents are all going through the same things. Like this morning on the show, I was talking about, yesterday was the first day of swimming lessons, and I was talking about how, oh man, those lifeguards, they're incredibly patient. Like seeing the 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds kind of swim around and not really follow orders. And I think a lot of parents can, resonate with that. Things I won't divulge is, like where my daughter goes to daycare. I'll say that she goes to daycare, but I try and, her pictures all over the place. I play clips of her on the show, play clips of your son on the show.
So everyone might be wondering what this clip is of my son on the show.
Yeah. Where were we? We were hanging out in a gully next to Tano Burger Bar, and you're like, "Hey, my son can't say the word big kids."
So what he says something else?
You know what he says?
I know. Well, for those on there, he says big dicks, and he doesn't really know how to say big kids yet. So and this was several months ago, and it was funny. At the end of the day, it's so refreshing because you can kind of share these moments with more people, and they definitely can relate to it. Right? It's the same thing you were mentioning before that everybody has these experiences, and the more you can be a real person, the better it is. Versus, I mean, when you're on the radio and my son hears you, he says, it's Uncle Clint's there, but at the same time, seeing you in person at a local school, introducing yourselves to kids, becoming part of the community is so important. So you chose to move back from Winnipeg back to the Lower Mainland in Vancouver, and you got a job back at your old station. Is that right?
That's right. Um, I think that I put a blast out on social media the day I got let go, and I immediately had a call from my old general manager saying, "Yeah, we'd love to have you back." So from that, just worked my way back up. I did evenings on radio station in Vancouver for some time, and I got married to my now wife, and yeah, it was interesting. Like I was working like the midday show for a bit, and we were waiting on some new talent to show up, and so we got married, and then like a month later, not even, they're like, "Yeah, so you're gonna work the evening shift now. So you're gonna work opposite schedule from your new wife."
Oh no. And how is that's got to be tough, right? Like she's done a lot for you, right? I mean,
Moving all over the place.
she's moved to Vancouver, she's moved to Winnipeg. She's really sacrificing for your career, which is awesome. I mean, and that's an incredible support system to have. But also now you compounding that by not being around and not seeing her that much.
Stuff. That's why the weekends are sacred, right? We
Mhm.
try and, go out and hike and have fun together as much as possible. Um, the evening schedules, it's cool to like be in a dark room and you're cranking music. This goes for like when I'm doing the morning show as well. You're in a dark room playing a crazy big hit song at like 5 in the morning. You're like, who else is like listening right now, right? Or, late at night, you're in a dark room all by yourself and you're gonna turn a mic on and you're like, oh man, there's a good chance that like 300,000 people could be hearing this right now. It's really cool, especially in your hometown, right?
Mhm.
You see the mountains and everywhere you grew up. Here in Prince George, it's cool. You get a nice view of the cut banks in the morning, and you see, industrial everything on your side of the river going wild with the trains and stuff. Like, oh yeah, the world isn't 9 to 5, right?
I think that's true. I mean, when you travel other places in the world as well, one of the things that's always super interesting to me is how different things are and how they're always the same and how the world never sleeps, right? And like you can talk about any part of the day. If you go out, there are people out and there are people living their lives that are in the middle of, maybe they work night shift, maybe they just get up. Like there are people that get up at 3 in the morning. God, I can never do that. But they get up at 3 in the morning, 4 in the. Well, you get up at 4, and they go to the gym, they go for a marathon run, right? They get set up for their day, and by 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, they're absolutely pumping out so much production that it's incredible. And you're communicating with these people, and there's a lot of them out there. Um, do you take that like role in people's lives fairly seriously? Like, do you ever think about how you're like actually you might be their best friend in some ways?
I don't think that highly of myself, Doug. I just know it's my job to, you know, provide entertainment. And I think an old boss explained it to me. Most people don't like their job, right? They don't want to have to, get up at 6, start their car when it's minus 30 and brush the snow off it. So if you're being, really glum on the radio, it's like you're not helping anybody out. So
Mhm.
be there and be the positive force. So fortunately, I'm a positive person, so it works out.
How do you tackle it on the days where you're not feeling it though? I mean, everybody has those, right? Like they're just like you're coming to work and you're just having a shitty day, car died, whatever it might be. How do you approach those days to still be positive and upbeat?
I don't know. Listen to the Bee Gees.
It probably would actually be very interesting for a lot of people. Like, I actually think that would be so many of us, like, we dwell on little crappy things that are going on in our lives, but it's amazing how much you can change your attitude and like your emotional state just by being happy or listening to the right song at the right time.
Well, it's easy to say like don't sweat the small stuff, but I think that's gotten to me where I am today is just be easy going. Like, crap happens. Oh well.
That's true. And you were in Vancouver for a while. You got married. You had your first child, and then made the decision to come back to Prince George, which probably was a really interesting decision. I bet your families were probably very surprised when you finally got that big job in the big city that you always wanted, and now you're moving on to something new.
Well, I was only doing the midday show in Vancouver, so I was on air 10 to 2, Monday to Friday, and I'd kind of hit my salary ceiling, and they weren't about to give me the morning show there or, make me a manager or anything. And great thing about Prince George, you can get ahead in so many different ways where young people are the managers of the city. They are in charge. They're business owners, right? Um, you can get ahead in the sense where cost of living is low. You can buy a house. We're so close to awesome recreational activities, like 10 minutes anywhere. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? 10 minutes away. Everything's 10 minutes away. Wait, what's up? Do you want to go for a snowshoe? Do you want to go hike? Go to the lake? You know, so that was really attractive to us because when you're older and you have kids, your metrics change. It's like I don't really care about going to being a bar star or going to a new restaurant every night. Can't afford that. I got diapers. I'd rather have people over at my place and make some good food and drink a case of beer. And doing that in a small apartment where I can hear my neighbor sneeze below, like was really starting to frustrate us. So when the opportunity came to PG, where hey, you have this bigger, better position with the pay raise, cost of living's down, and I was like, that's actually pretty good. And we already, since we had already lived in Prince George before, we had, a pretty good friend network already. So like, all right, well, this makes a lot of sense. Obviously, it sucks for our then 1-year old. She'll be kind of taken away from her grandparents.
Mhm.
My wife and I, we grew up without no real family around, like other than, parents, but no aunties or uncles around. So when we were, we had all the siblings, all the grandparents around, this is great. And then we move away. So that's the downside is not having, grandparents right
Mhm.
nearby. But the advantage is because now we have disposable income is, we're not 20, I can afford a flight to Vancouver every once in a while. I have credit card points, right?
Yeah. And that's been like obviously really important for you and your family and being able to share that. Um, I wanted to ask you a little bit about kind of how you mentioned this a couple times before. I apologize, but I think what's interesting is you've moved to a bunch of cities that if you didn't live in that city, you probably have not heard a lot of great things about it. Prince George, sometimes people talk down about it if you're in the lower mainland. Moving from the Vancouver to Prince George, people would say, why? But you also hear about that about Winnipeg, and you also hear that about a lot of these other cities. But you've really kind of made the best of it, and not only that, but you've been a massive supporter and promoter of those places after you've been there. Like how do you approach that? And like, because you're not just a celebrity within the city, you actually have networks quite wide and far now.
I remember announcing on social media that I was moving to Prince George on my last station's feed, and I was looking through the comments, as you do. Never read the comments, but do sometimes. This one guy's like, "Why would you move to a place like Prince George?" And I noticed his Facebook profile was him like on a motocross. And it's like, do you realize like you could have like 7 dirt bikes if you lived here, man? Like you could finish work and you could brap all you want all till the cows come home, right? If you're gonna be moving a place somewhere, like just dive in, right? There's no sense being bah humbug about this place where you live. It's not good for your mental health. Like, give it a shot. Like, if you can, uh, if you can, you can really do anything for a year, right? So,
Try it, see if you like it, and don't necessarily just take hearsay about it. Just like actually go and experience it for yourself, because I think that's the best way to find out if it's actually worth your time.
an old instructor at BCIT, Dennis O'Neill, RIP. He uh he he explained it to us. He's like, this isn't a job. Like, you're getting into a career. Like, sure, you're gonna start off doing like, weekend fill in or whatever, maybe promotions for a couple years, and then maybe you get the bigger time slot and you'll get into management or whatever. And he's like, measure that over 20 years. He's like, how long do most people live? Like, what's 2 years in Chetwynd? Like if you do a broadcast career for 20 years, what's 18 months? What's 2 years somewhere? It's plus like looking back to a young 20-year-old, like that's a pretty cool story. Even if they like totally switch careers, like there was a guy I was doing radio with now, and he still lives in Prince George, Aaron McTaggart. He now works at Finning. He sells like tractors. How do you go from playing like country hits to like I sell tractors now? I apologize. Maybe it's not tractors. Sorry,
Actually, it
Aaron.
makes a lot of sense, though. I mean, if going from country to tractors, that they're talking about tractors all the time, then they're
Nobody's really feeling.
yeah. That's okay. And then your other love is cast iron cooking. You got your own social media.
Yeah, follow me right now at cast.iron.cookin, not ing, cookin. You follow me on Instagram. I got all the best cast iron recipes. That was actually spawned out of COVID. I couldn't leave the house, so I had like a Amazon gift card. So I bought a big cast iron frying pan, and then after watching a bunch of stuff on Instagram, because I love camping, and I went through this other rabbit hole of like, oh, cast iron. Oh, this is great. And I remember reading once, I'm like, oh, Teflon makes your balls small. It's like I should get some people using cast iron forever. So I started, making giant cookies in cast iron pans and gaining 15 pounds. It was great.
It was great. I mean, it's the COVID-15, right? Comes before the COVID-19.
Everybody's doing it.
Yeah, no, I hear you. That's awesome. You've had such an interesting career so far. I think I'm really curious to see where you go from here. Obviously, we hope you stay here for a long, long time, and you're kind of a bit of a legacy position in particular because as the morning show host, your predecessor Mike Benny was there for many, many years and is like a local legend, and you have a really tough set of shoes to follow in you and Vilma because of that. Coming from a place with like that much legacy, has that changed your approach to how you do the position, how you feel about your role?
I never really met Mike Benny. I remember seeing him in my first tour here in PG, and I know how beloved he was, but from the stories I've heard about him, he was like a pretty easygoing guy. Just be a nice, likable guy, and you be a good, nice person in that position for a long enough time, you just become this kind of household name. So that's kind of the approach. Don't take it too seriously. Like we have a screw up counter on our program. We're not polished broadcasters. We're regular people who, don't say the best words all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think living up to a legacy to Mike Benny is you wouldn't want to put yourself in that position, because I don't know if you'd ever want to live up to it. Like I'm Clinton Herman. I'm not someone else, right?
Yeah, you got to be your own person, and that's what people appreciate about you for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. If people want to follow you on social media outside of cast.iron.cookin, where can they find you?
No, just cast.iron.cooking. It's the only plug. No. You can follow me at Clinton on air. You can also find me on the social media channels for at 1013 The River. We're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all the above.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been following you on TikTok for a while. Really appreciate the content, always entertaining. And it's been a pleasure. Really appreciate what you do for the community. And I'm excited to see what you're doing in the future. Until the next time, cheers.
Thank you for listening to You Sip, I Sip. Please hit the 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you'd like to learn more about Northern Lights Winery, text us at 604-670-4046 or visit us on social media at Northern Lights Winery.